Good day, and welcome to Jewish Sacred Aging, video conversations for Jewish baby boomers and our families. We'd like to welcome to this conversation Rabbi Simcha Raphael, author of Jewish Views of the Afterlife, for a conversation on this very interesting topic that has really formed a large part of conversation about what it means to die and what it means to believe or not believe in an afterlife. So welcome, Rabbi Raphael.
It's an honor to be here.
Nice to see you. You spent a lot of time exploring these ideas about Jewish views in the afterlife. Tell me a little bit about how you got started in this rather interesting calling.
Well, it was actually a very particular event when I was in my early 20s. My closest friend was killed in a car accident, and it was the kind of trauma that is life-changing for people. And I remember very early on, soon after his death, here we were burying a 21-year-old guy in the middle of a cold Montreal winter in Mount Pleasant Park. There was nothing pleasant about that, but I felt a sense of his presence.
Wow.
There were kind of what we would call synchronistic moments, felt sense of presence, and I kept wondering, what happened to him? Where did he go? I remember the day he had died, he had been with me in my home. We were cooking a meal together, and there was leftovers from the meal in the fridge. I came back in the middle of the shift. I said, is he there? Is his energy in the food? And when I began to ask, what does Judaism have to say about life after death? I was greeted with this uncomfortable sense of uncertainty. Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't, we're not sure. And yet I had already studied world religions, and I knew that there were teachings all around the world. And so that motivated my thirst and both spiritual and intellectual curiosity to start studying what Judaism has to say about life after death.
So for the civilization that's, let's say, at least 3,000 years old, do we believe in an afterlife?
Well, when I was originally working on what became the book, Jewish Views of the Afterlife, I had written the phrase, Jews have always believed in life after death. And one of my editors said, you can't say that. You could say Judaism has always had a belief in life after death. Do Jews believe in life after death? Well, some do and some don't. But throughout history, from the very beginning of time, there is certainly a sense of an interconnection between this world and the world beyond. And often the way we read Tanakh, the way we read Torah, we don't see that. So that when Jacob says, make sure that I'm buried with my ancestors in Machpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, he's really saying, I know that when I die, I'm going to return to those folks on the other side. Or when Saul is fighting against the Philistines, and he says, I haven't heard from God. I need some information. Let me go to this woman who can call up the dead, and she calls up Samuel from the dead. Even though there's been a condemnation of those kinds of soothsayers, there's still evidence that there is a connection in the world beyond. So in the biblical period, it's a little bit vague, but certainly throughout history, and especially in the medieval Kabbalistic period, there's a very, very clear sense of continuity of consciousness after death that's evidenced in Jewish texts.
So the soul, I mean, we talk about a lot of this at funerals, and we talk about it in sermons, the Jewish soul. According to your research and your work, and you go out speaking around the country a lot, and the book, where does our soul go? Where does our soul go after we die? Because rabbis we get asked this question all the time.
Well, if we were to time travel now back to, say, the 12th to 16th century to be with the Kabbalists, and we would ask them the same question, they would say, well, soul is not simply this kind of amorphic entity that sort of floats around like a little angel on Hallmark greeting cards, because sometimes we think about soul in that kind of way. They would say to understand the nature of the soul and understand what happens after death, we have to understand what it means to be alive. So here, you and I are sitting here. We're in our physical bodies. There's a feeling sense that we might have. We're thinking thoughts, and then there's this whole realm we call spirituality, where somehow our own individuality connects to something greater. So for the Kabbalists, all of those are aspects of the soul. The soul is multi-tiered, and in death, the body dies. There's a part of our being that's sort of animated energy that sticks around for a while and then dissipates. There's a part of us that has an emotional repertoire. Like if I said, if I did an X-ray of you, I would see your bones. If I did an MRI, I would. If I did an MRI, I would be able to see a tissue structure. But imagine we could do an emociogram of someone. So we would see we hold anger in this part of the body. We hold grief here. We hold other feelings in our midsection, and it seems to be that the residue of feelings that are left over in a realm that the Kabbalists would call ruach, that seems to go through some kind of process of purgation, what our tradition calls Gehenna. Gehenna is sometimes thought of hell, but it's really a kind of processing or cleansing of all of the unresolved psycho-emotional pieces of life.
How does this relate to this undercurrent or this segment of Jewish tradition and history, which a lot of people, I don't think, are really aware of? And I'm sure you've run across it in your work and your speaking about the demonology aspect of Judaism and that fact that we have spirits and we have angels and we have this is part of our tradition. How does this work that you're doing relate to that?
Well, when the Jews came in through Ellis Island, allegedly they threw their tefillin into the water. They threw their prayer box, and they wanted to be Malmadam.
Right.
And so there was a sense that we're now going to become more rationalistic, and we're going to contour ourselves to American, really it was American Protestant culture.
Right.
And I say that they threw away the baby with the bathwater, because things like spirits and demons and meditation and states of consciousness and afterlife and soul and all of that is part of the legacy that got thrown away with rationalism. And so in my own work, I've been trying to reclaim it, because people have a felt sense of presence after death.
Explain that. A felt sense of presence after death.
Okay, well, let me be rabbinic in a second and quote a text. It says, "For 7 days the soul goes back and forth from its home to its former grave," in the Zohar. So people are sitting around the Shiva house. And as I like to say, they couldn't have another cold cut if they fed them intravenously, right? And somebody says, "Didn't it feel like Daddy was in the room? Didn't you have a sense of that?" Or people have a dream, and then they need to go to see the Buddhists, what the Buddhists have to say about afterlife, or read about Shirley MacLaine, and I want to say, no, look, it's right here in our text. For 7 days, there's a sense of transition. So we have this sense in Jewish tradition that's not known, that there is some kind of transitional state immediately after death. And it corresponds with our rituals. For example, people walk around the block at the end of Shiva. And so on one level, on the psycho-emotional level, it's saying we're returning back into our ordinary life. We're going to go back to life. But on a spiritual level, it's also saying to the soul, we can walk you this far, and now you have to go the rest of the way on your own. So in the early phases, there's some kind of sense of potentially the soul could, if you will, peek through and stick around and do its own goodbyes.
So you've done a lot of work as a hospice chaplain, if I'm not mistaken, you're a psychotherapist.
Right.
So in your work in the therapeutic community and the hospice community, how do you see a belief in an afterlife being helpful for people who are facing death?
Okay, well, let's first talk about hospice. So we know about this phenomena called near-death experiences.
Right.
And in the near-death experiences, people sometimes see a deceased relative or a vision of some mythic being. People have a life review. These kinds of experiences are documented in Jewish tradition. So
Where?
well, there's stuff in rabbinic literature, in Midrash. There's a lot in Zohar.
Did you discuss this in your book?
In
right?
my book, I discuss each of these different periods of Jewish history. There are numerous Hasidic tales that sort of anecdotally have evidence like that. Somebody is teaching, and then they stop and they say, "Oh, Rabbi so and so just died." So again, the sense of the worlds are permeable, and so people often have visionary things happening on the deathbed that when people are dying, sometimes say, "Oh, Mrs. Schwartz is hallucinating. Let's give her some more drugs," or "Oh, obviously she's just agitated." But what's the agitation? Is that there's some kind of interior process going on. So if there's this phenomenon of life review that's documented in our sources, I say talk to people about death. Talk to people about their life. Help them review their life. To ask somebody, who do you imagine will be there for you at the end of time? Who's going to be there? So to let people know that they're not going to be alone when they die is a very important piece. So in terms of the hospice, I think the awareness of some of the visionary phenomena, and that one can be accompanied. In terms of bereavement work, in terms of grief work, and I do a lot of work as a psychotherapist in that way, one of the hardest things for people is to sense that a relationship simply ceases with death. Somebody dies, you bury their body, and in a materialistic view, they're in the ground, they're decomposing, and there's no more connection. But the connection of the heart is very strong. And so I will teach. It's said in our tradition that the dead will appear in dreams. People have dreams. So I'll say to somebody, do you ever have a sense of a dream connection? And people will come in and talk to me about their dreams. And they'll say, "Oh, I'm making it all up." And I'll say, "Well, I don't know if you're making it up. It certainly, there's evidence that kind of thing happens." And again, people have a sense of felt connection. People have these meaningful coincidences. When I was a kid, my father would take a $5 bill, he would fold it in four, and he would slip me $5. And I went out on a date. And it was his birthday, and it was I think it was for the yahrzeit of his death. They coincided, and I got out of my car, and there was a $10 bill sitting right underneath right in front of my car. And I told that teaching story a couple of months ago, and somebody came back the next day and said, "I think your father was here because I found the $10 bill in the parking lot." So did that happen? I don't know. But is there a sense that there's some continuity of consciousness and connection? It's very important for people to know that. And teachings about life after death in Jewish tradition suggest that there is some kind of continuity.
Simcha, thank you very much. This is the first in a series of conversations here on Jewish Sacred Aging, and the issue of bereavement with Rabbi Raphael we're going to take up in a second conversation. Thank you very much for being part of this conversation on Jewish Sacred Aging, this first one with Rabbi Simcha Raphael. Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.